Tonight, we're going to walk you into a story that has been upside down for centuries, and maybe, just maybe, it's been upside down on purpose. You've heard the one about the devil, right? Horns, pitchfork, pure evil from the start? Well, what if I told you that in the earliest pages, Satan might not have been evil at all? What if his first job was actually helping God? I know, your Sunday school teacher just fainted somewhere. Before you settle in, tap that like button and subscribe, only if this is the kind of deep, strange history you actually love. No strings, just stories worth staying up for. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on sun-bleached earth under a sky so wide it could swallow you. This isn't medieval Europe with its fearsome gargoyles. This is the ancient Near East, where the earliest stories about the adversary first take shape. The desert wind carries dust into your eyes, and the air tastes faintly of salt and ash. In the distance, tents cluster together like punctuation marks in the emptiness. Here's the first twist. In the Hebrew Bible, the figure called Ha-Satan isn't a rival god or a rogue angel. He's a title, the accuser or the adversary. His role? To test loyalty, expose weakness, and keep divine justice from getting sloppy. He's less a villain and more a prosecutor in a heavenly courtroom. Historians still argue whether this adversary was ever meant to be a permanent personality or just a rotating role among the angels. Think of it like jury duty in the divine realm, except your job is to point out where humans might fail. Not glamorous, maybe, but vital to the order of things. Your quirky tidbit? In some early Jewish traditions, the adversary wasn't even an outsider. He attended the same divine council meetings as the other heavenly beings, sitting in the same court, answering to the same God. Imagine being the guy at the staff meeting whose sole task is to tell the boss, this plan might fail. Unpopular, sure, but necessary. And here's where the first sliver of irony slices in. A role meant to strengthen human faith eventually gets remembered as the ultimate betrayal. But in these earliest whispers, there's no horned figure ruling a fiery pit, just a functionary carrying out assignments that nobody else wanted. So you walk deeper into the sands, the heat bending the horizon. Somewhere out here, before the idea of the devil calcified into centuries of fear, there was only a watchman, an interrogator, a tester of hearts. And if you squint past the dust, you might start to wonder, what went wrong? The sand crunches beneath your feet as the desert gives way to a grassy highland. You hear distant bleating, flocks of sheep scattered across low hills. We've stepped straight into one of the oldest moral dramas ever written, the Book of Job. It's here that Ha-Satan makes one of his clearest early appearances. You might expect him to burst onto the scene with fire and chaos, but no, he enters like a quiet bureaucrat at roll call. The sons of God present themselves before the Almighty, and the adversary is simply there. No one gasps, no angel reaches for a sword. He's part of the team. God asks where he's been. From roaming the earth, Satan replies, as if he's just clocked in from a long commute. Then the conversation turns toward Job, a man so upright it's almost annoying. The adversary's job isn't to seduce Job into sin for sport. It's to test whether Job's faith is genuine or just a byproduct of comfort and prosperity. Historians still argue whether this scene shows an independent being opposing God's will or a loyal servant carrying out a divine stress test. The text itself never suggests rebellion. It reads like authorized fieldwork. The adversary proposes the test, but God sets the terms. Your quirky tidbit? In medieval mystery plays that dramatize this story, Satan sometimes wore a scholar's cap and gown, not horns, because he was understood as a kind of examiner. Picture a stern professor handing you a blank sheet of paper and saying, "Let's see what you've learned." You watch as Job's world collapses. Livestock stolen, children gone, skin covered in sores. It's brutal. And yet, in the story, Satan can't lift a finger without explicit permission. This is not the runaway villain of later lore. This is a cosmic prosecutor carrying out a very uncomfortable order. And here's where it gets thorny. If this early adversary is working for God, then evil becomes less about rebellion and more about the painful process of testing integrity. You feel the discomfort of that idea. It's the same tension that's been bothering theologians for thousands of years. A warm wind stirs the grass. Job sits in ashes, scraping his skin with a shard of pottery. The adversary, gone from the narrative, his task complete. No gloating, no infernal throne, just silence. It's almost as if his role was never to destroy, but to set the challenge, and then leave. The scene shifts upward, far upward, until the ground falls away and you find yourself in a space that feels both endless and enclosed. No walls, yet you know you're inside something. The air is still but heavy, as if waiting for a verdict. Welcome to the divine courtroom. Here, in ancient Israelite imagination, God presides not as a solitary monarch, but as the head of a council. It's a concept borrowed in part from the political reality of the time. Kings had advisors, scribes, and messengers. Why wouldn't heaven work the same way? In this council, Hasatan isn't a criminal in chains, he's the prosecutor. You notice he doesn't slouch in a corner or brood in shadow. He stands before the throne, speaking with confidence. His questions cut cleanly. Has this nation truly been faithful? Has this king ruled justly? The role is essential, even if unpopular. Without an accuser, complacency would creep in, unchallenged. Historians still argue whether this courtroom imagery was meant literally, as a depiction of supernatural bureaucracy, or metaphorically, as a way to explain why misfortune befalls even the righteous. In either case, the adversary is firmly inside the system, not lurking outside it with an army of demons. Your quirky tidbit? In some rabbinic interpretations, the prosecutorial Satan and the angel of death are the same being, meaning the one who accuses you in court is also the one who escorts you out when your time's up. Talk about doubling down on job security. In this chamber, accusations aren't spiteful, they're procedural. You watch an ancient scribe record the exchanges with meticulous strokes, each word preserved for eternity. The adversary's tone is formal, almost bored. It's the tone of someone doing a necessary job that nobody thanks them for. And here's where the irony creeps in again. When later generations read these scenes through a lens already shaped by ideas of rebellion, they see a traitor challenging God. But if you strip away the later layers, what's left is someone following orders with unsettling precision. The court adjourns. Scrolls are sealed. The adversary vanishes from sight until the next summons, leaving behind the faint echo of footsteps on a floor that isn't quite solid.
The air shifts again, warmer, thicker, and you're standing in a bustling marketplace somewhere along the Mediterranean coast. The scent of fish mingles with incense. Merchants shout prices over the din, and in the distance, a marble temple gleams in the sunlight. We've stepped into the intertestamental period, the centuries between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, when Jewish thought was rubbing shoulders with Greek philosophy, Persian dualism, and Roman power. This is where the adversary begins to pick up new accessories. Foreign cultures bring their own supernatural hierarchies. Persia's Zoroastrianism speaks of a cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda, the good deity, and Angra Mainyu, the evil one. Greek myths teem with gods and spirits who rebel, trick, and punish. The Jewish adversary, once just a tester within God's court, starts to be imagined in darker, more independent colors. Historians still argue whether this shift was the result of deliberate theological borrowing or just the natural blending that happens when cultures mingle. What's certain is that literature from this period, books like 1 Enoch, paints a more elaborate underworld than anything in earlier scripture. Angels fall, some by lust, others by pride. The adversary becomes a leader in these cosmic dramas, though still not always the horned overlord we're used to. Your quirky tidbit? In the life of Adam and Eve, a Jewish text from this era, Satan's alleged fall happens because he refuses to bow to the newly created human. That's right, not a coup against God, but a snub against you. Talk about a grudge that gets way out of hand. You wander into a shaded colonnade where scholars debate in a mix of Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. One insists the adversary is a necessary part of God's plan. Another warns that such talk makes him sound too respectable. A third flips through a scroll describing a final judgment where the forces of light and darkness will battle for creation itself. And here's the thing, this is the moment where the adversary starts to escape the courtroom. He's still connected to God's authority, but now he's acquiring a taste for being the main antagonist in humanity's epic story. It's not quite the devil yet, but the seed is there, drifting across the ancient world, looking for the soil where it will finally take root.
The marketplace fades, replaced by a dusty road cutting through the Judean hills. It's the 1st century now, and the air hums with expectation. Rome's banners cast long shadows over villages, and whispers of a coming Messiah travel faster than the news of Caesar's decrees. Into this tense landscape, the adversary re-enters the scene. But this time, the role has changed dramatically. You're there at the Jordan River, where a man named Jesus has just been baptized. The skies seem to tremble. Then the narrative shifts. 40 days in the wilderness, no food, no comfort, only heat and stone. Here comes the adversary, now called the devil, offering not accusations, but temptations. Stones into bread, power over kingdoms, a chance to leap from the temple and be caught by angels. Historians still argue whether this wilderness episode is meant as a literal encounter with a supernatural being or as a symbolic vision, a kind of spiritual trial compressed into a single scene. Either way, the adversary is no longer a heavenly prosecutor taking orders in court. He's acting as an independent operator, testing loyalty through seduction rather than calamity. Your quirky tidbit? In some early Christian art, this devil is drawn not with horns, but with the face and wings of a beautiful angel, because artists wanted to show that temptation rarely looks like something you'd instinctively run from. You follow Jesus back into the towns, where he keeps bumping into more unclean spirits. Sometimes they're portrayed as separate entities, sometimes as extensions of the adversary's influence. The boundaries blur. The devil becomes a catch-all term for forces opposed to God's kingdom, whether cosmic or local. By the time the Gospels are being copied and shared, this figure has shifted from a member of the divine staff to the chief enemy of humanity. No longer a role within God's justice system, he's the shadow at the edge of every story. And here's the most important change. You can feel it in the air like a storm moving in. The adversary is becoming a character you can hate, fear, and rally against.
In a time when Rome's power is overwhelming and oppression feels inescapable, the devil becomes the perfect villain, not just because he's dangerous, but because he's beatable in the end.
You walk deeper into the heat of that wilderness moment, because it's worth lingering here. The devil's three temptations are more than clever offers, they're archetypes. First, survival. Turn stones into bread. Second, power. Rule over all kingdoms. Third, certainty. Leap and force God's hand to prove his protection. Each one is tailored to human vulnerabilities, not just to Jesus, but to you. The scene is stripped bare. No courtroom robes, no heavenly council, just two figures and a landscape so desolate it hums. You can almost hear the rasp of wind over stone. And for the first time in this long story, the adversary speaks without reference to divine orders. He's not asking permission, he's proposing a deal. Historians still argue whether this marks the moment Satan graduates into full independence as an antagonist. Some see it as theological evolution, others as narrative necessity. After all, a hero is only as compelling as the villain who pushes back. Your quirky tidbit? In some Syriac Christian traditions, Jesus and Satan's wilderness exchange was imagined like a formal debate, complete with scriptural citations on both sides. Picture it, not a magical duel, but an intense verbal chess match where each move is a quote from the Torah. You follow Jesus back into Galilee, where exorcisms become a recurring motif. Each time an unclean spirit shrieks and flees, the shadow of the adversary looms larger. He's not just tempting individuals, he's imagined as orchestrating a whole network of resistance against the arrival of the kingdom of God. And here's the subtle irony. If Satan's original role was to test and strengthen, then these encounters could still fit that script. Each challenge forces the hero to define himself more clearly, to articulate what he stands for. The adversary's pressure shapes the mission's clarity, even if he's now framed as a rebel. You watch the story gather speed, rumors spread, crowds grow. The devil moves from the margins into the center of Christian imagination. No longer the quiet examiner in heaven's court, he's the rogue agent in the field. Unpredictable, dangerous, and for storytellers, far too useful to set aside. The dust of Galilee fades beneath your feet, and now you're treading on cold, worn stone. The centuries have turned, and you've stepped into the shadowy interior of a Roman catacomb. Oil lamps flicker on the damp walls, illuminating crude paintings of fish, anchors, and shepherds. Christianity is no longer a backwater sect. It's a movement under pressure, growing in secret, always under the threat of persecution. And in this underground world, the adversary takes on a new role, the ultimate conspirator against the faithful. The early church fathers, men like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian, speak of the devil not as a mere tempter, but as the architect of pagan religions, the whisperer behind the idols of Rome. The adversary's sphere of influence now covers the entire non-Christian world. It's a narrative that helps early believers explain both the persistence of rival faiths and the hostility of imperial power. Historians still argue whether this globalization of Satan's role was more about theology or survival strategy. Was it genuine belief in a universal enemy, or a unifying story that made the scattered Christian communities feel part of a single battle? Your quirky tidbit? Tertullian even claimed that Satan invented the Roman gladiatorial games to corrupt the moral compass of the people, basically accusing him of being the first sports promoter with a bloodlust marketing plan. As the faith spreads, martyr stories become central. Every imprisonment, every execution by sword, fire, or wild beasts is framed as a contest against the devil's influence. For believers, the martyr doesn't just die for the faith.
they defeat the adversary in the final round. You feel the narrative tightening. The devil has shifted again from tester to tempter to cosmic puppet master. He's no longer confined to spiritual encounters. He's the invisible general directing the empire's armies, priests, and philosophers against the church. And here's the clever twist. The more powerful Satan becomes in the Christian story, the more powerful the victory of Christ seems in contrast. By magnifying the villain, the hero's triumph grows in scale. In the darkness of the catacombs, the oil lamps flare, casting long shadows that seem to flicker into the shape of horns, reminding you that even here, beneath the city's feet, the adversary's image has found a way to keep watch. You climb the worn stone steps out of the catacombs and into the blinding light of the 4th century. The smell of incense is thicker now, but not from secret worship. It pours from vast basilicas. Christianity has gone from persecuted faith to imperial religion, thanks to Constantine's conversion. And with this seismic shift, the adversary takes yet another turn. Before, Satan was imagined as a shadowy saboteur operating through Rome's pagan institutions. Now, those same institutions are baptized, literally, and the church finds itself in power. So, where does the devil go? Into heresy. The great theological disputes of the era, Arianism, Donatism, Pelagianism, aren't just academic quarrels in the eyes of the bishops. They're seen as the devil's strategic infiltrations, corruption seated within the church itself. The battlefield has moved from the arena to the altar. Historians still argue whether this was a sincere conviction or a political weapon. Labeling an opponent's teaching as satanic had obvious rhetorical benefits. It delegitimized the rival and made dissent sound like treason against God himself. Your quirky tidbit? At the Council of Nicaea, where bishops debated the nature of Christ, some accounts say the atmosphere got so heated that St. Nicholas, yes, the inspiration for Santa Claus, slapped the heretic Arius in the face. If true, you could argue that, for one brief moment, Santa punched someone for the Lord and against Satan's alleged influence. Now sermons thunder with warnings of the devil's subtler work. He's no longer the roaring lion outside the camp. He's the whisper in the pew, the pride in the bishop's heart, the theological loophole that lets sin slip back in through the side door. And here's the paradox. You sense it in the incense-thick air. The more the church embeds itself in political and cultural power, the more it needs a spiritual enemy to guard against complacency. The devil, once a tester in God's court, has become a kind of theological mirror, reflecting the church's own anxieties about authority, unity, and purity. You pass under a triumphal arch carved with scenes of emperors and angels. Somewhere in the stonework, barely visible, a small figure crouches at the edge of the panel, part man, part beast, watching with the same patience he's always had.
The stone arch dissolves, and you're standing in a damp village square in late medieval Europe. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and manure. A crowd gathers near a makeshift platform where a trembling woman is being accused of witchcraft. Her neighbors swear they've seen her speaking to a black dog at night, or that her butter churn never fails, no matter the season. The verdict? She must have made a pact with the devil. This is the age when Satan's image crystallizes into something immediately recognizable. Horns, tail, cloven hooves, often painted crimson. It's a composite born of scripture, folklore, and artistic imagination, fine-tuned for maximum fear factor. Here, the adversary is no longer the prosecutor of the righteous. He's the ringleader of a conspiracy of witches, heretics, and misfits. Historians still argue whether the European witch hunts were genuinely driven by belief in Satan's earthly agents, or whether they were convenient tools for consolidating local power. Either way, fear of the devil became a powerful social adhesive, uniting communities against an imagined enemy, while conveniently explaining crop failures, plagues, and personal grudges. Your quirky tidbit? One 15th century manual, the Malleus Maleficarum, claimed that witches could steal men's genitals and keep them in bird nests, all thanks to Satan's assistance. It's not exactly peer-reviewed science, but it sold the idea that the devil was a hands-on participant in rural life. The art of the time doubles down on terror. In church murals, Satan glares from the Last Judgment, dragging sinners into hellfire. Mystery plays show him bumbling comically on stage to make the moral lesson go down easier. Because even in the grip of fear, medieval audiences loved a laugh at the villain's expense. And here's the interesting twist. In making the devil more physical, more theatrical, and more absurd, medieval culture also made him more accessible. He's no longer an abstract tempter or invisible whisperer. He's a face you can point to, a shape you can fear in the dark, a convenient explanation for every unanswerable why. The crowd in the square chants louder as the accused woman's fate is sealed. Whether she's guilty or innocent almost doesn't matter. The devil's story has evolved into a force that demands visible enemies, and history will oblige with as many as people are willing to imagine.
The square fades into smoke, and when it clears, you're in a cramped study lit by candlelight. The year is 1517. The smell of ink and old parchment hangs in the air. Outside, Europe is bracing for a storm that will rip the church apart. Martin Luther is sharpening his quill, not for a duel of swords, but of theology. And in his writings, the devil will become more personal than ever before. The Protestant Reformation reframes Satan as an active, immediate threat to individual believers. No longer just the tempter in the wilderness or the puppet master of distant systems, he's the one whispering directly in your ear. Luther himself wrote of waking in the night to feel the devil's presence, hurling inkwells at him in frustration. Historians still argue whether Luther's vivid descriptions were literal experiences, dreams, or rhetorical devices. Whatever the case, his influence stamped this intimate, psychological devil deep into Protestant imagination. Satan wasn't just corrupting popes and kings, he was after you, right here, right now. Your quirky tidbit? John Calvin, Luther's fellow reformer, believed the devil sometimes disguised himself as a pious believer just to infiltrate the church unnoticed. A theological version of "the call is coming from inside the house." Pamphlets and sermons spread faster than ever thanks to the printing press. And the devil's image, once the exclusive domain of church frescoes and mystery plays, now floods popular media. Woodcuts show him grinning over gambling tables, pushing drink into a tavern-goer's hand, or dancing with witches under a moonlit sky. And here's the deeper irony. In freeing themselves from what they saw as the corruption of the Catholic hierarchy, reformers needed a way to explain why even pure doctrine could still be resisted. The devil, now fully untethered from any courtroom duty, becomes the perfect scapegoat for lingering sin and disunity. The candle flickers low as Luther scratches out another sentence, warning believers to stay vigilant. Somewhere in the shadows of the room, you imagine a smirk curling across an unseen face. A reminder that in the Reformation's world, the devil doesn't just visit in disguise. He's already here, in the thick of the fight.
The candlelight blurs, and you find yourself in a dim, wood-paneled library in 17th century England. Outside, rain lashes against the leaded windows. Inside, a man sits hunched over a desk, quill in hand, eyes blazing with the intensity of someone trying to write the very architecture of the cosmos. His name is John Milton, and with Paradise Lost, he's about to give Satan one of the most enduring makeovers in literary history. Milton's Satan is not a grotesque medieval caricature or a whispering tempter in the shadows. He's a tragic, charismatic figure, a rebel against tyranny, eloquent in defeat, defiant in the face of impossible odds. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, he declares, and readers have been debating ever since whether Milton accidentally made the devil the hero of his own story. Historians still argue whether Milton meant to evoke sympathy for Satan or simply made him too compelling for his own theological agenda. But either way, the effect was seismic. Suddenly, Satan could be an object of fascination, not just fear. Your quirky tidbit? The Romantic poet William Blake once quipped that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it, a backhanded compliment suggesting the poet's heart was secretly with his rebellious creation. From here, literature and art start bending the devil into ever more complex shapes. In Goethe's Faust, Mephistopheles becomes sly, witty, and urbane, a dealer in soul contracts rather than apocalyptic wars. In Byron's poetry, the satanic hero archetype oozes charm and tortured dignity. The adversary becomes a mirror for human ambition, pride, and yearning for freedom. And here's the delicious irony. The more artists humanize Satan, the more he slips free from the constraints of dogma. He can be a villain, an antihero, a romantic foil, even a tragic muse. The courtroom prosecutor of ancient scripture is now moonlighting as literature's most magnetic rebel. The rain outside eases, and the air smells faintly of ink and damp leather. Somewhere in the stacks, you could swear you hear a page turning on its own, quiet, deliberate, like a voice reminding you that stories are the most effective disguises the adversary has ever worn. The scent of leather and parchment fades, replaced by the sharp tang of coal smoke. You're now in a crowded 19th century city street, London maybe, or New York. Steam rises from grates, carriage wheels clatter over cobblestones, and the glow of gas lamps cuts through the smog. This is the industrial age, and even the devil has to adapt to modernity. Gone are the medieval witches' sabbaths and the pastoral temptations of the countryside. In sermons and popular pamphlets, Satan is recast as the corrupter of cities, lurking in gambling halls, opium dens, sweatshops, and political backrooms. The adversary's influence now wears a top hat and a factory owner's smile. Historians still argue whether this urban devil was a genuine theological update or a moral panic dressed in religious clothes. After all, the 19th century was a time of unprecedented social change, mass migration, industrial exploitation, and widening class divides. Painting these upheavals as the devil's work made them easier to moralize about and easier to resist without overhauling the social order. Your quirky tidbit? In Victorian penny dreadful literature, Satan sometimes appeared as a literal gentleman, immaculately dressed, charming, and willing to strike a deal in exchange for your soul. The trope of the devil as a dapper businessman likely owes more to Dickens-era capitalism than to biblical tradition. Meanwhile, evangelical revivals on both sides of the Atlantic treat the devil as an ever-present spiritual stalker. He's blamed for skepticism, drunkenness, even the newfangled pastime of reading novels. In the rhetoric of revival preachers, the adversary doesn't just inhabit brothels and opium dens, he might be right there in the pew next to you, disguised by a hymn book. And here's the pivot. While the devil is still feared, he's also becoming entertainment. Stage magicians parody him in top hats and capes. Newspapers run satirical cartoons of him haggling with politicians. And in some circles, he becomes shorthand for sly wit and rebellious charm.
You watch as the lamplighter makes his rounds, the hiss of flame against glass echoing down the foggy street. Somewhere in that haze, you imagine the outline of a figure tipping his hat before vanishing into the night, because by now, the adversary knows how to thrive in the spaces between fear and fascination.
The gaslight dims, and suddenly you're in a living room in the mid-20th century. A television hums softly, its black and white screen glowing with flickering images. This is the age when Satan steps fully into pop culture, not as a theological inevitability, but as a versatile character who can sell movie tickets, headline comic books, and still scare a Sunday school class half to death. The 20th century takes all the earlier versions of the devil, the rebel, the tempter, the cosmic enemy, and distills them into an image that can be endlessly remixed. Hollywood casts him in horror films like The Exorcist, where demonic possession turns into box office gold. Rock and roll fans whisper about musicians making deals at the crossroads, while heavy metal bands splash pentagrams and goat heads across album covers. The adversary becomes as much a brand as a belief. Historians still argue whether this was the secularization of Satan or just the next phase of cultural storytelling. After all, a villain who can scare, seduce, and amuse is too useful to abandon, even for audiences that no longer take him literally. Your quirky tidbit? In 1946, the U.S. Army actually staged a mock trial of Satan for war crimes against humanity as part of a military chaplain training exercise. Satan was found guilty, of course, but the idea that the devil could be put in a courtroom, again, felt like a strange echo of his ancient origins. Meanwhile, in revival tents and on early Christian radio, preachers double down. To them, Satan isn't just a character, he's the mastermind behind communism, secularism, and the moral decay of modern life. The adversary is no longer confined to a dusty Bible story. He's allegedly in your schools, your music, even your television set. And here's the twist you can't ignore. By making the devil a pop culture icon, the modern world gave him something he'd never had before: celebrity status. The adversary can now appear in jokes, marketing campaigns, or horror trailers without losing his edge entirely. Fear and fascination are perfectly balanced. The TV crackles as the channel changes. A cartoon devil grins and sells you canned ham. You can't help but think, if the original courtroom Satan could see this, he might be impressed, not with the theology, but with the sheer adaptability of his public relations strategy. The static from that black and white screen dissolves, and you find yourself scrolling through a glowing smartphone in the 21st century. The devil has followed you here, slipping into memes, conspiracy theories, and streaming service dramas without missing a beat. His horns are now digital, rendered in CGI, hashtagged, and algorithm boosted. Today, Satan exists in overlapping worlds. In religious preaching, he's as urgent as ever, the architect of moral collapse, the manipulator behind politics, technology, and culture wars. In secular spaces, he's an ironic mascot, printed on coffee mugs, plastered on band merch, and repurposed for Halloween parties. The line between mockery and homage blurs in the blue light of every screen. Historians still argue whether the digital devil represents a dilution of fear or just its evolution into a subtler, omnipresent form. The ancient prosecutor has become an idea that can travel at the speed of Wi-Fi, shape-shifting to fit any narrative, from TikTok jokes to viral testimonies about encounters with pure evil. Your quirky tidbit? In 2019, an American fast food chain launched a PR stunt claiming it had sold its soul to the devil for a new burger recipe. Sales spiked. The press covered it. The devil, it turns out, still makes a pretty good marketing consultant. In online conspiracy spaces, Satan is recast as the hidden hand behind global cabals, shadow governments, and every news headline that feels too strange to be random.
In fantasy franchises, he's reimagined as a misunderstood antihero or suave nightclub owner. Streaming platforms hand him entire series arcs, letting audiences fall in love with the adversary week by week. And here's the wild symmetry. You've come full circle. The ancient Ha-Satan was a role, a title, an office in a cosmic courtroom. Today, the devil is again a flexible role, filling whatever gap a culture needs. Villain, scapegoat, rebel, icon, meme. The setting changes, the costume changes, but the utility remains the same. You glance up from the phone screen and half expect to see him sitting across from you, not with horns or hooves, but with an easy smile, asking if you've considered what side of the story you've been believing all this time.
The glow of the phone fades, and you're left in darkness, quiet, almost total. A faint rustle of parchment reaches your ears, and slowly the scene sharpens into view. You're back in an ancient chamber where a single oil lamp burns. On the table lies a scroll, unrolled to a passage you've seen before, Job's story. The adversary stands in the shadows, not with a pitchfork, not with fire in his eyes, but with that same steady gaze from the beginning. You've walked thousands of years tonight, tracing every reincarnation of this figure. From loyal examiner to cosmic rebel, from whispered tempter to cultural celebrity. And now you can see the strange through line. The adversary's role was never fixed. It was always a mirror, a reflection of what each era feared most, dressed up in language, art, and rumor to fit the moment. Historians still argue whether the evil devil we know today is a distortion of the original concept or an inevitable evolution of storytelling. Was the Ha-Satan of Job really so different from the PR-savvy Lucifer of social media fame? Or have we just changed the set design? Your quirky tidbit? In some strands of Jewish mysticism, Satan is imagined as an angel so loyal to God's plan that he's willing to take on the thankless job of opposition, because without resistance, righteousness can't be proven. Not a traitor, but the most demanding sparring partner in the cosmos. You picture the adversary closing the scroll, smiling faintly, and stepping back into the shadows. No gloating, no fire, just the quiet satisfaction of a job that, in his mind, has never been about hatred. And here's the quiet twist you can't shake. If Satan was never evil in the first place, then maybe all along, the story has been less about defeating a villain and more about understanding the need for one. Because without an adversary, would the hero's courage still mean the same thing? The lamp flickers low, shadows stretch, and your long journey feels like it's folding in on itself. Every version of the adversary overlapping in a single, timeless silhouette. The air cools. The shadows smooth themselves out into soft, indistinct shapes. You feel your shoulders loosen, your breath deepen, as though the weight of centuries is finally sliding away. The sound of the ancient chamber, those faint echoes, the subtle crackle of the lamp, blends into something gentler, more like the hum of a far-off tide. All the noise of the devil's transformations, the shouting marketplaces, the catacombs, the printing presses, the gaslit streets, the streaming screens, has gone quiet. In its place, there's just the stillness of an unrolled scroll, the faint scent of old paper and oil. The story, for now, is at rest. You picture the adversary one last time, not in triumph or in defeat, but in stillness. Maybe he nods at you, maybe he doesn't. Either way, there's no malice in the gesture, no threat, just the understanding that every role in a story serves a purpose, even if the audience forgets how it began. Your breath slows further. The flicker of the lamp becomes the slow pulse of your own heartbeat, steady and sure. Outside the chamber, the world goes on, full of fears, villains, and heroes yet to be named. Inside, there's only calm. As the last of the lamplight fades, you let your eyes drift closed.
The story will be there in the morning, waiting for the next time you're ready to walk it again. Sweet dreams.